of Rapport, using Neurolinguistics to improve communication, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by James Eicher. Today's webinar will last around 1 hour. If you have any questions, you can always type them into the questions box. We will be answering questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or as a follow-up by email. A well-respected author and consultant, Jim Eicher is a subject matter expert in the fields of sales, organizational strategy, leadership, and communication. During his career, he held leadership roles at Booz Allen Hamilton, Andersen Worldwide, Symantec, and NetApp, as well as the founder of Cognitive Management. Welcome, Jim, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank everybody for tuning in today, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I appreciate you taking your time. I know it's tough to take any time from the day now. Some of us can't even spell the word lunch anymore because it's been so long since we've been able to take one. So I do welcome everybody and appreciate you tuning in here. So we're going to spend some time talking about communication and specifically as it pertains to neurolinguistic programming. And just a bit about my background. Those of you that are familiar with neurolinguistic programming or NLP, I actually went to the University of California, Santa Cruz in the 70s, where John Grinder and Richard Bandler and Frank Pusick were creating NLP. So I kind of got into the ground floor and have had various applications of it in years ahead. Just one plug in there for those of you that are sort of interested in the background and the social aspect of the development of NLP. There's a recent book by John Grinder, Origins of NLP, which is kind of a fun read. It gives you the whole background about how it was created. So thanks again for joining in. And Sarah, if you could go to the next slide. So some of you might be familiar with the Neurolinguistic Communication Profile model that you see on this page that we use in the assessment. And if you've used this or you know about it, that'll help today. But it's not necessary to have taken the NCP, as we call it, or have used it at all in terms of understanding the behavior today. The focus is actually, if you have used the NCP, and which is a self-assessment of your communication style according to this model, really answers the question, okay, what do I do now? What do I do behaviorally? How do I understand this? How do I apply it? How does it work in different work situations? How can I just observe people and assess communication style as well as adjust the communication style myself? So I do like to get a bit of a pulse of people that are on the webinar with how familiar they are with the NCP. So if we could go ahead, Sarah, and launch the first poll. And that has to do with how many of you have used or are familiar with the NCP. Take a couple of seconds and select one or the other, and we'll go from there. Okay, so looks like we've got just about everybody here. And well, this is good. This is good news. It looks like about close to 90% of you are not familiar with the NCP. So this will be a new background for you, and a little over 10% are. So that's great because this will fit quite well with that and give you the background to see if you find it useful going forward. So thank you very much, Sarah. And we'll go on to the next slide. By the way, that helps me calibrate, which is, no, actually, I think, yeah, that's fine. That helps me calibrate in terms of, as we go through the concepts, how many of you may be familiar with the concepts of NLP as well, so that's super helpful here. So the next thing we do is, let me ask all of you a question out there. My guess is that some of you have had the experience of meeting somebody for a very short amount of time, and you just kind of naturally get along with them. You know, it's easy to talk to them. It's easy to do things together. You have, similar interests. Things that normally might be a conflict with someone else in another situation aren't. So you kind of wonder, like, hey, this is working out pretty well. And then sometimes you meet somebody in a very short amount of time. You don't want to be around them at all. Difficult to work with, even though you're saying, I think we should get along. We have a lot of the same ideas and beliefs and philosophies, but it's just not working out here. And the basis of this concept and how it relates to NLP is the concept of rapport, which some of you might be familiar with because it's kind of one of those NLP terms that's gotten out into a lot of language around coaching and leadership and management and that sort of thing. But we're going to delve quite a bit into what that is and how to recognize and how to develop it. So let's go ahead and have another quick poll here. Sarah, if we could launch a second poll. And again, how many of you are familiar now with the concept of rapport? So let's take a few minutes and do that. Okay, great. Wow, this is super interesting. So we have close to 90% this time that are familiar with the concept of rapport as opposed to the NCP. And rapport is one of those NLP-generated terms, like if you've heard of the terms framing and reframing and rapport and some of the other ones that have gotten so much out into the vocabulary of learning and development that people, even if they've never heard of NLP, are familiar with. One thing that sort of blew my own mind as far as how much it's gotten out there is the fact that if any of you have seen a recent movie with Colin Firth, The Kingsman, there's a whole section on them in them using NLP in their spy work. But that's for a different discussion. So let's go ahead and talk about how this is going to work. Let's go to the next slide. Now, what we want to do in any kind of interaction is what I call first contact with an individual. And all first contact operates on the following things. It always has imperfect information, no matter how much you prepare, how much background you've had, how much vetting you've done, you don't know everything. And even if you do, it's no replacement for the interaction that you have with somebody. So there's always imperfect information. There's always the potential for long-term relationships, even if you think there is not, because you never know in a network of individuals whether you're going to cross that person again in some of the contacts. So that's also in the background. And as much as we may want to work on it, and as much as we want to feel relaxed and rehearse with things, there's always a little bit of short-term tension when you're having the first contact with somebody, even if they're, let's say, a friend of a good friend and that sort of thing. So this goes to the idea here that, you know, as they say, you only have one time to make a first impression. And the outcome that you want to have, according to this model from your first impression, is that of rapport. And that relationship and that experience you have when you start to connect with somebody. So let's talk about that a little bit more in some examples. So Sarah, could we go on to the next slide? So I have a question for the group here. You can go ahead and type in some responses. We have two columns here, column A and column B. Each one's got a pair of individuals in there with different kinds of nonverbal communication, because that's what we can do here with the pictures. And I'd just like you to take a casual look at them and ask yourself, what are some of the similarities between the columns A and B? What are some of the differences? I grouped them together. Do you agree with my groupings? It's not a right or wrong thing. And then I'll talk about, you know, so what, who cares about this? So take a couple of minutes and do that. And I believe, Sarah, that people can answer on the question in the chat area, if that's correct. Okay, so thanks. Some good responses here. So what are some of the things that people observe? Well, what you notice here is that there's the one of the key foundations in terms of putting rapport into practice is this idea of mirroring. And mirroring can occur on a nonverbal level, on a verbal level, visual, tactile, that kind of thing. So it goes through all the senses that are a critical part of the NLP model. So what you see here is that in certain situations, even if you know, the facial expression is negative, there's some mirroring here. The other thing too is you look at this is that you don't have all the information. So you could look at this and you could draw some kind of conclusion that may not be correct in terms of what's actually happening in this interaction here. But more or less, people have an intuition that if you look in column A, these people are probably getting along pretty well. And that's kind of the general thing you look for. And in column B, you have an intuition that there may be some conflict there, or there may be some sort of disagreement. And what you're seeing here is you have an intuition naturally about mirroring rapport and what's going on. And what we really want to do in less than this next hour or so is take what we call unconscious competence, which is the intuitions that you have about how people are getting along, how you're getting along with people, how to improve that communication, and we want to turn it into what we call conscious competence. So that's going to be a critical part here, going from unconscious competence to conscious competence, specifically as it relates to the NLP model and rapport that we're talking about now. So let's go to the next slide, and we set the stage here. So let's see how we're going to go through here. First of all, we've set the stage and talked about first contact and the value of rapport. We're going to talk about the webinar outcomes. We're going to go a bit more into rapport and relationships. There's a cycle to it in terms of communication steps, like there is with a team building and a lot of other things you might be familiar with that we'll talk about. We're going to talk about a couple of concepts called pacing and leading in terms of changing your behavior and fitting your style to improve communication, reduce conflict with other individuals. We'll spend some time talking about how to apply this to work, and a little bit about what you can do going forward. So let's go right into the next slide with the webinar outcomes. So what is critical with the model that, particularly in the early slide of the NCP, was understanding what someone's communication and learning style is. So what we're going to do here is we're going to learn not just within NCP, but how do I observe, listen, even if it's over the phone or even an email or a text or any other kind of thing. What is the person's communication and thinking style, and what is their preference? It's a very critical part of rapport, because when I talked about conscious and unconscious competence, what you're having unconscious competence about when you're developing rapport with people is that, and you especially see this with really good salespeople because they tend to do it unconscious competence, although a lot of them have had this kind of training before, is they're able to pick up on the cues and the clues of how people think, what the communication is, and match and be flexible to do that. So that goes to the second thing, where you want to have personal and professional flexibility, but it's going to be in a very deliberate, practical, step-by-step way that we're going to talk about here, so that you can move towards mutually beneficial outcomes for you and whoever you're dealing with, whether it's in your family, whether it's at work, whether it's on a sales call, a supplier, working on a project team, trying to put in Oracle or SAP, whatever it is that you're doing, that it'll benefit that. And then the other thing, too, is that you want to interact with others, and this is kind of one of those bolder claims, but I think all of you on the phone will actually have a sense of this very goal of yours. Sometimes you'll understand how people can communicate better than they do, which quite transparently can kind of creep them out sometimes, but it's very, very effective and powerful in terms of building rapport and reaching mutually beneficial outcomes with people. So let's go to the next slide and talk about a little bit more formal definition of rapport. And so forgive me for reading this here. So as you go forward, so rapport is a state shared by two or more individuals whose behavior, thinking, and values come into alignment regardless of the content of the desired objectives and outcomes. You have friends that you are 180 on your political beliefs, your religious beliefs, where you think a good place to live is, how to raise your kids, any kind of whether you're a dog or a cat person, who knows, things that you think would just like be complete showstoppers as far as getting along with people. But maybe they're your best friend. Maybe you're even married to this person. So, you don't know. So rapport is very powerful in terms of it really has to do with thinking and communication styles that transcend the content of any particular individual philosophy. Now, the core here in terms of the practical conscious competence development of rapport in the NCP model or NLP model is that you recognize what the communication, learning, and thinking style is, and then you develop style, fit, and flexibility to do that. Now, a lot of the stuff I'm going to go over in here, you're going to actually recognize as things that you do. But again, a lot of times it will be unconscious competence and conscious competence, and we're going to really refine that so we make it conscious competence for you most of the time. So, so a lot of you do this, you recognize the style, and you're flexible and fit naturally, and we're going to improve that. So let's go to the next slide and talk real quickly about how does this apply to you? And I've already mentioned some of this. So rapport in your work life, management, leadership, customer, stakeholder relationships, your personal life. So if anybody wants to have any examples, feel free to go ahead and type them in, but I'm going to talk through some of them here. Now, of course, in your work life, one of the things you can do is if you have rapport, if you have good rapport with your boss, then obviously then your conflict situation is going to be minimized. You can have open, transparent conversations. The same thing if you work in teams. If you have good rapport with the individuals. In managing up and managing down, having good rapport and important. Understanding the style and thinking style is important. Leadership roles. Some of the research that's been done is that good managers and leaders are flexible. They do have flexible style. They understand, at least at the unconscious competence level, different ways that people understand things, learn, they explain things very well. They know how to get close to people, have people feel comfortable with them, and develop this naturally as they go along. And as I alluded to before, good salespeople, good customer relations in terms of developing a relationship with the customer, closing the sale, that sort of thing. And of course, in your personal life, any kind of reduction of conflict, development of trust is in a parenting environment is also very, very important and very, very valuable as well. So these are a number of the ways. And as we kind of get into what are some of the tactical things that you can learn, I'll give you some really specific examples from my own experience at work. Okay, so let's talk about the process of establishing rapport and go to the next slide. So it would be great if you could give everybody you met the NCP. It's sort of like, I can't remember which movie it was that I saw or book that I just read, but it was, going out and he was giving somebody a survey before they go out with him each time so you can assess what, different styles and that sort of thing. But that would be sort of a nice environment to be able to do that and use the NCP to understand thinking and learning styles. But that is not the common situation. So the question is, well, what do I do? How do I understand this? So let's talk about the basics of the model. So the basic core of the communication style is that each individual has a preference for either visual learning and communication, auditory, so just how things look, how they appear, and before I jump into some examples about that, I'll go over the other stuff. So auditory, conversation, talking, listening, key part of music, key part of communication and learning style, thinking style, and kinesthetic and tactile. That could be a couple of things. It can be feelings, emotions, that kinesthetic equation, or on the other side, it can also be tactile things. Those a lot of you know people that are kind of like sports fanatics, like to get up and do things very active, very physical. So that would also be more on the kinesthetic kind of sensory motor style here. So that's the basics of the model, and we're going to refine that as we go through here. And coming back here then is the key thing in terms of developing rapport and the other skills associated with improving your communication is recognizing communication style and then fitting your style to the other person and being flexible enough to do that. That's where we start to operationalize this idea of getting out of your comfort zone. So everybody's got a comfort zone, and so that's great, but what can I tactically do to recognize that and get out of it? And this model is very good at saying, hey, this is your comfort zone. This is how it's different from somebody else's, and this is exactly what you need to do to get there. So that's where we're going with this. In terms of if you aren't familiar with the NCP, it's similar to different things like the Myers-Briggs or DISC or situational leadership in terms of trying to assess style and fit here. But the basics of this model is it's a cognitively based model. It's really about how people learn and think, and the behavior and the research behind it is very powerful, and it's actually applied more and more, as you're seeing with different things with computer applications that we all use on our smartphones and stuff, and speech recognition, all that kind of stuff. That's all cognitive psychology, but applied now because the technology is powerful enough to do that. But NLP has the same sort of cognitive basis, that sort of thing. So let's start with an overview of the model on the next slide, on slide 11. It's going to give you the categories of, hey, Jim, how do I recognize what someone else's style is so I can be flexible and fit with their style and develop rapport and get the outcomes that I need? So there's 4 main categories that we're going to go over here for the remainder of the webinar. And the first one is habits of attention, literally what you pay attention to and what other people pay attention to. Now, one of the things that's assumed as we go through this is you're going to have to get out of your own head and become a really, really good observer. So all of these are dependent on you observing others, listening to others, watching others, feeling what's going on, having a sense of things around these 4 areas. So the first one is habit of attention. The second one is habits of organization. How do people organize their thoughts? How do people organize their work? How do people organize how they present information? And you know, as we go through this, you're going to see some examples that sort of pop out at you as Tom Peters once said, blinding flashes of the obvious, which for those of you right at this point, somebody will recognize that as a very visually oriented statement, a blinding flash of the obvious. And we're going to talk about language and metaphor also, because that is also a very powerful way to recognize style. And then last, eye movements, and we'll go over those as well. But the main thing here is that cues are clues. So they're all around you, and we're going to point to a map in the next several slides. So if we go on to the next one. All right, so this one is habits of attention. It's literally, as I said, with the NCP model, we're looking at visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So it's literally, what are you looking at or is someone else looking at? What are they paying attention to? What are you or someone else listening to? And how are you moving about and how are you feeling? So let's think about it this way. So, you know, one example that I talk about here is, let's say you're a car salesman. So, you know, I think most people at some point or another have bought a car or have been in a car showroom. So you're standing in the showroom and you're watching, and someone comes in and they walk in and they stand about 2, 3, 4 feet from the car, maybe their arms folded, and they look and they look and they walk around a little bit, and then maybe they crouch down a little bit, look at another angle, and then stand back, and then, you know, look at it from a different position, shake their head. Maybe if they go into auditory mode, they start asking about colors and what are the options on colors. So, and then of course a lot of you could probably think now the visual buyer of the automobile is not only concerned about how the automobile or the truck looks, but I guarantee you, and some of you out there have already done this in the 5 seconds or so that I talked about it, you actually visualize yourself sitting in the car or the truck and how cool you would look inside of it. So that's a case where it's, if you know what you're looking for, it's very obvious. This person has probably at least a component of a visual style of learning and thinking and communication. So then we get to the auditory. So the auditory person, they go up to the car, and of course they don't just look at the car. What they'll do is they'll open the car door, they'll close the car door before they get in the car, then they'll open it up again, then they'll go sit in the seat, and then they'll close the door, and then they'll turn on the sound system, and then they'll also do something that if you're not prepared for it, so it might be a little different, is that they'll just sit in this car completely still and be quiet because they're listening to how soundproof the car is. And then what they want to do is they want to take it on the road because then they want to hear how soundproof it is and everything sounds when it's riding, including the sound of the car itself. So, and those of you that like quiet, you know, you're probably going to be buying, you know, hybrid cars because, you know, the engine shut off a lot of time. So this is the case where obviously, you know, you've got the auditory bar, and they will start asking a lot of questions about the car, about its performance, about this, about that system, about this option, this feature. And then what you have is you have what you're probably going to down the kinesthetic bar. So what they're going to do is they're going to go in and if you're in the auto showroom and you've just spent the last hour polishing the car on the showroom, this is really going to upset you. But this is one of those things where instead of reacting with conflict, understand the style, you go, hey, I know how this person wants to buy this car. Because the kinesthetic person will walk in and they will touch the car. And they might put their hand on the car and walk around the car entirely 360 degrees with their hand or hands on the car to get the feel of the car. Then what they'll want to do is they'll want to get in the car and they'll squish you around on the seats and they'll thump the dashboard and they'll grab the steering wheel and there's a shifter and get all comfy and get a good feeling for the space inside the car. So you see, if you're the car salesperson, you just polish the car. Rather than get upset, then you're just going to go in there and say, hey, how would you like to get in and feel how this car is? And these seats are really comfortable. So how does that feel against your back? And, you know, the steering wheel's got a really good grip, gives you a really good feel for buying the car. So you can see by these examples how the style works in this particular way. So in other words here, the first one, first half of attention, what are you looking at, what are you listening for, and what are you moving or feeling about? So Sarah, let's go to the next slide. So the next component here that's critical is that, and that is a refinement of the original model, or the NLP model that we put in the NCP, is that you do have the orientation of being from attention, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, but taking in the left brain, right brain work as well. You just don't process information visually, auditory, or kinesthetically. You usually do it in a serial or parallel way. So let's talk about this here, and I'll give you some examples. So to go through this chart here, so if you're the serial thinker, likes to do sequences, one task at a time, a step at a time, what you might call an analytical person, detail, likes a chronological order, tends to like to complete a task before moving on. So, and then the parallel thinker, multitask, things kind of go all over the board. They seem to kind of scattered. They look at the themes. They talk about the bottom line. If they're visual, they talk about the big picture. So if your boss comes in and wants the big picture, you know that they're visual and a parallel thinker. So we're going to talk a little bit later about, well, what do I do in that case so that I can develop rapport and give my boss, him or her, what they want. So to give you some examples here in terms of organization. So a lot of times when you look around, you know, you can see how people's desks are organized and that sort of thing. So, but another thing is, again, not to get a little bit personal here, but one of the fun things I have is, you know, I know if I were to walk into any of your homes that, you know, I would go into the bedroom and open the sock drawer, one of two things would happen. One is that the socks would be there, perfectly aligned by color, in a sequence, all bundled together in order, even maybe by size, right? Pretty frightening for some of you that are not left-brain people out there. And some of the people, of course, I'd be terrified to open the sock drawer because I know the socks would shoot out in some kind of explosion because they've all been stuffed in there. So this is an example, like in real life, how you organize things. And you can see this with kids. You know, particularly kids aren't a lot of times very serial as they're growing up. So if you open the closet door, everything is in a complete pile or a mess. This is the clean clothes, by the way, not even the dirty clothes. It's in a mess. So, but if you ask Susie or Johnny, can you find the blue striped sock that you wore last Wednesday? They will be able to go into that pile and be able to pick it out. This is because neither style is right or wrong or good or better, but each one is different in terms of how information is organized, whether it's organized spatially, whether it's organized visually in a big picture kind of way, or whether it's organized in a very visual serial way, like an Excel file. Like some of you out there right now are going, gee, I love working on Excel. And some of you go, oh my God, that's horrible. And some of you look at your PowerPoint slides. Well, that's the difference between a visual and a serial and a parallel approach to things. And of course, you know, what you want to do is you want to learn how to do all of those things. So let's go into the next piece here, sensitive to time. So Sarah, if you could advance to the next slide. So the third habit of attention here, and another one that you probably picked up on in this conversation, and pick is a word there. What kind of word is pick? Pick is a kinesthetic word. But the language that people use is also a reflection of their style and their thinking. So if they want to see the bottom line or they want to have a conversation, now if they're auditory and serial, they're going to have a conversation, but they're going to ask you tons of questions. You know, a lot of times if I have a group of engineers, they tend to be serial, whether they're auditory and ask a lot of questions, or of course you're an engineer, you do a lot of detailed kinds of drawing. Versus people talk about how they feel, and they have to feel okay before they can make a decision, and they talk about how things are churning in their guts, that kind of thing. So the language all around you also indicates what your particular style is. So that as well, and the thing about that, I was just looking down here, is it's not just the speaking, but it's reflected in email, it's in text. You know, it's very valuable information in terms of not the content that people are asking for, because give you an example here. So I'm at a client and I've got two HR people. One is auditory and one is visual. So what do I have to do? I have to walk in, I have to be able to verbally explain what it is that we're trying to do, the outcomes and the benefits for them, and I have to have a picture. I may have to have several pictures, and not only have to have a picture, but I have to have it in a certain format. Do I know if this person is going to react more favorably to Excel or a screenshot of an Excel file, or are they going to want to see a flow chart on a PowerPoint, or are they going to want to see a set of bullets? You know, all of this is the kind of stuff that if you use this information without attention, you can begin to understand. So with that, let's go to the next and fourth clue on the next slide, Sarah. So this one is a little more challenging to explain on the webinar, but let me see if I can create this opportunity for you. So there's a couple ways you can do this. You can next time you're watching TV, particularly if it's a live show, not so much a rehearsed thing, but a kind of live. An interview is great. If you can have a favorite interview show, go ahead and watch there, or you can sit yourself like in a coffee shop or something like that and observe other people. And what you're going to see is as people talk and pause, because this is where this happens cognitively. People say a phrase, say a sentence, and they'll pause. And a lot of times when they pause, they'll do something like, let's see, and their eyes will move a certain way. Or, you know, I like what I heard, and then their head or eyes will look another way. Or they'll talk about and express, well, this is the way that I felt. And what you'll notice is that their eyes and head movements are moving, but they're not moving in a random pattern. In the old days, we recognized this through the research doing EEGs, but now you can do cool things with PET scans and stuff to see how the blood is flowing in the brain, all this kind of stuff. But generally speaking, when people are either observing outside of their head or they're in their head, they tend to be either making pictures or talking to yourself. And I just want to show everybody it's okay that you talk to yourself. It's just a problem if you don't know who is answering back. And then the other thing is you know, people have internal feelings and emotions about stuff. So this internal dialogue, internal visual imagery, the movies in the mind, that sort of thing, this is also characteristic of how people think and learn. And one of the easiest ways when you learn how to do this is you just watch people as they're talking and see how their eye moves. So let me decode this chart a little bit here. So the V here is for visual. So generally speaking, if the eyes are looking up, you're accessing visual images. And if you were to hook somebody up to a PET scan, you'd see that going to the neurology, that the occipital lobes in the back of their head are bright, and because they have more blood and having more neural activity. The other thing is that if eyes are moving side to side, or sometimes a little bit straight ahead, or down and to the right, the A is auditory. People are usually accessing some sort of internal dialogue or conversation. You've probably met people that have really good visual memories. You've met people that have really good auditory memories. They remember every conversation. It's just a tape rewinding in their head. And their eye movements will indicate that. And a lot of times when people are emotional or feeling, they'll be looking down, particularly down to the right or down straight ahead to get to get in touch with the feelings. The interesting thing, too, is if you watch athletes, particularly those that have and need to perfect balance as part of what they're doing, they will generally be looking down to kind of get that in that state to get the balance. You will very rarely see somebody trying to balance very difficultly and have their head fly up into the air and look straight up. It kind of sounds kind of silly when you think about it, and that's because you don't see it very much, and you just tend to see the gaze go in that direction here. So this is the fourth, and this is the nonverbal, but interpersonal way also of recognizing communication style. All four of these are important in terms of recognizing style, and then as we move into this here, next couple of sections, in terms of fitting your style in a conscious competence way to develop rapport. So let's go to the next slide. And we have a poll here. So let me start to attach this here. Let me summarize and attach this to a work situation. So, you know, you have habits of attention, organization, you have language and metaphor, and you have eye movements. And so now you've just been put about managing a large project for your organization. What is the first thing that you do? Now, just even looking at the slide here and answering the question, it should make a whole lot of sense. And we're going to start connecting reality here right now. Interesting, it's pulling numbers here. Go with our research. So let me see. Okay, that's good. That's good, Sarah. We've got everybody now. And okay. So, and the reason I was mumbling to myself, auditorily speaking, is I was thinking about the research and the percentages we've done on NCP. So, most of you here want to visualize that project plan. Give me the plan. I want to see, you know, a lot of what we use is POAP, plan on page. I got to see that. Now that's more the big picture one. Those of you that are out there, projects, know what I'm talking about. Big picture, using an Excel file, gives the main chunks of time, when the project's going to start, when it's going to end, what are the key milestones, that sort of thing. I personally hope never to use Microsoft Project. That's sort of a diss there. I apologize for that. But that is an extreme example of a visual project plan that's very left brain, very cerebrally oriented. Those of you that have used projects, see, so you can see this in your day-to-day life. So see, visual, the connection there, plan on page. Now, auditory, you want to talk to people. You want to sit down. You want to have some conversations with the key stakeholders. You know, how do I get in touch with them? Let me make some connections, set up some meetings. Want to have some calls. So right away, you can see like what's somebody's style here. Like I am naturally auditory. So, but over the years, what I've done is you know, if I go in and I've got a partner, a project lead who's visual, I'm not going to walk in and ask him how it's going. I'm going to walk in with the plan on the page. I'm going to put it down in front, and we're going to talk from a visual reference on what to do next, what are the deliverables, and that sort of thing. They want to see the deliverables. They don't want to talk about it. Some people want to talk about it. They want to think things through. That helps them. And then 15%, you know, this lower here, is you generally, and when I say feel anxious about the responsibility, it's not in any kind of negative way. It's that usually it's an anxiety that motivates you to get out and start getting things done. Okay, so this all occurs in the context, so let's go to the next slide, 17. And what you have here is the rapport cycle with 4 phases, and they are, it's a 2x2 around relationship and intended outcomes. So let's go to the next slide. And so your starting point here is on contact, and this goes right back to the beginning of the webinar on first contact where you're developing rapport. Once you have established rapport with individuals, it is easier to start the next phase on this, which is you're starting to sort things out. Some people, like if you use the Tuckman model, storming sort of phase, where you're starting to sort out, talk about the differences. If you work in a project plan and you work on ERP engagement, you might have had a fit gap analysis. That's the sorting phase here, and it's always good to have rapport before you go to the sorting phase because you're talking about what the gaps are and the fact that it's probably going to cost your client twice as much as they thought for you to fix it. So rapport is very, very helpful there. Then you go to the agreement, which is, okay, we got the SOW, we agree, here's the deliverables, then you can start, once you get agreed, then you get to the next stage, the verifying, which is also really the implementation phase as well. So, like I said, in the project contract, that's kind of the cycle that you would go through. So let's go on here and look at some of the other applications. So now, Jim, now that I know here about style, or certainly more than I knew a half hour ago in terms of how people process information, how they think, whether it's in a detailed or a bigger picture format. So what do I do? So in order to develop rapport, and problem solve with people and reduce conflict. There's three areas we're going to talk about. One is mirroring. The other one is what's called formatting and chunking. Another chunking is another word that's kind of come out of the NLP universe and it's out there. And then how you create value and practical applications with people. So let's go to the next slide. So what you want to do here in terms of developing rapport is and there's been a lot of studies on this, video studies and all kinds of things of individuals, is that you want to intentionally mirror. Everybody unconsciously mirrors. Like I said, just go into a coffee shop, watch people interact. You'll see them leaning over at the same time, laughing at the same time, touching at the same time, lifting up their forks at the same time, their cups at the same time. So they're unconsciously mirroring each other. So what you want to be able to do is, and I want to make the point, there's a difference between mirroring and mimicry. You don't want to do exactly what the other person does, because when you become conscious of it, it's kind of insulting and manipulative. What you want to do is both of you feel relaxed. So what you tend to do is mirror, pick a couple of things from this list, and you mirror. So on the left side, you've got kind of visual things you could see: the facial expression, hand and arm gestures, eye movements, head movements, voice tone, breathing, that sort of thing. You'll notice a lot of times people talking in the same tone. One person starts to talk in a low tone, and the other person automatically starts talking in a low tone too, and then they don't even think about it. They just kind of mirror each other. And then the other side, you've got tempo, how fast or how slow. Those of you that travel a lot, you really see a lot of these differences. But here's the thing, though. If you go to a different country, you just need to mirror what they're doing. It doesn't matter what the difference from you. It's the mirroring activity, the pacing, what we call pacing. If I'm necessarily pacing them, I'm matching them, that will create the rapport. So these are different indicators. These are actual intentional behaviors that you can do. I usually try to, one of the things is an auditory tempo, because if you're talking slower, a lot slower, or a lot faster than somebody, it really disrupts rapport. And any of you out there that have had the experience of a call center, and they're either speaking much faster or much slower, it's really difficult to establish rapport and get communication in. But if they have the same cadence of voice, even if it's an accent, but if it's the same cadence, then it's a lot easier to establish rapport here. So we're going to go ahead to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about pacing and leading here. So in terms of the next piece, which is formatting. So I did talk about, okay, you can establish rapport through mirroring. That's sort of a body thing that you do with individuals. This is if you do stuff. Okay, you've got clients, you've got bosses, you have subordinates, you work on teams. How can I format my stuff so that it will fit somebody else's style? Well, first of all, conscious competence, you've got to recognize the style. All right, so let's assume at this point, after about 40 minutes, you can do that. And so what you want to do is you want to find out what works for this person. So visual examples of formats are charts, photos, memos, email, anything graphic, anything visual. If they're more left-brained, it's more texty, and if they're more right-brained, it's more flowcharts, visuals, graphics. You know, get those fancy graphics. Marketing people are usually good at making those cool pictures, that sort of thing, but then you turn to the project manager on a project and they want to see the Excel file. So you just have to understand what those differences are and be able to translate the information into the format. The next thing is auditory. Stories, testimonials, music, discussion, song, anything verbal, conversational. Again, a lot of times people like things very linear when you talk, like bullet points. Bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3, bullet 4. That's different than, hey, let's sit back and kind of chew this over, kinesthetic word, but in an auditory context where it's kind of free-flowing, we're brainstorming. Hey, brainstorming is very different than we're going to go through and getting the problem solved, stuff like that. Kinesthetic gesturing models, giving a demonstration. People like a common term is walkthrough. One of the things I do on projects I call wall walks, which you combine visual. I usually take posters of plans and put them on walls and have people talk them through and then walk around and touch stuff and put up Post-it notes. See, that way you get all of the senses in there in communication style, so you can build rapport with everybody. That's sort of the ideal way that you can do this. And kind of get to the thing, is there a way that you can make something seen, heard, or something felt? And I do always recommend the wall walk if it's appropriate with your client, because it does feed into all styles. Okay, so let's be sensitive to time here. Let's go to the next slide. And this is, there's the formatting part of communication output, which is the visual, kinesthetic, and auditory formatting, but then you have to chunk it. And I've already alluded to this, is that, so if you're going to put visual information out there, is it going to be, you know, big picture, you know, graphics, dazzling kind of stuff, or is it going to be like, you know, at the other extreme, an Excel spreadsheet? Same thing, auditory, as I said, bullet points or kind of a brainstorming conversation. And the same thing with kinesthetic, is like, if you do a wall walk, think about a wall walk, is that, yes, people are literally walking, touching, doing things, but it has a linear sequence to it. Okay, that's different than let's go have a team building activity and do a ropes course or something like that. So again, the key question out there is, can I make something big or small? Can I make something detailed or more conceptual? That's what you want to be sensitive to working with those people. All right, let's go to the next slide. And just give a summary here, and then I'm going to talk about a couple of applications, and I think we've got time for a few questions still. So this loops back to the beginning here, kind of bookends. So what you can see here is you've got three pieces of the model here. You've got how you attend and take in information, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And then once that information gets into your head or noodle, to use a technical term, then how do you process it? How do you organize your thinking? Is it serial, is it parallel, is it detailed, conceptual? And it's not right or wrong, and it can change all the time, going back and forth. A lot of times the reality of work is that things do need to switch. They need to get detailed and then conceptual, and you know, there's the quote-unquote executive summary, which we always call the big animal pictures for the people at the top. So what you've got to do is you've got to distill all this detail into a nice summary, verbal, and usually visual as well. And that goes through output. What kind of output do they want? Do they want to talk about it? Do they want to see some slides? Do they want to get a handout? That sort of thing. That's kind of the summary of the model here. So if we go on to the next slide, a couple of quick examples of applications. So one is teamwork, another one is conflict management, and another one is on a phone. So let's go to the next slide. So quickly here, I'm not going to read through all of this, but if you're building a team with the information that you have now, I really highly recommend that you go through these questions and ask yourself, what's your style? What kind of information do you prefer? How do you organize your thinking? And you want to assemble a diverse team that has as many of these styles as possible. That is the ideal. Can't always have the flexibility of pick in this case, but you want to have the diversity of style. You want to have people that are visual thinkers, auditory, kinesthetic, detailed, big picture, because they will facilitate getting the most comprehensive problem solving on your team, regardless of what it is you're trying to do, whether it's something in engineering, it's in healthcare, it's with a school system, it doesn't matter. But that will be the optimum team here. So on the next slide, we go into another application, which is conflict. And there's another NLP term here, and that has to do with anchoring. Some of you might have heard of that. Generally speaking, a conflict is triggered by what's called an NLP, a negative anchor. Anchors can also be positive, which of course then can mitigate conflict as well. So some examples of anchors are words, phrases, a color, a song, a tone of voice, some flowers, a particular smell, a company logo. So what it is that people have a behavioral response to this. And marketing people in particular have studied cognition for quite a while now. And they have also people in design and ergonomics. They have a pretty good idea about, you know, why they spend the time putting together a particular image or puts a logo on something. It's because it makes an anchor for somebody. It reminds them of something visually. You try to create a positive experience. That's what branding is all about. If I can create a positive emotional response to this image or this smell, if let's say I'm selling cologne or perfume, then I have established rapport with this individual, and in the business context, you know, it translates into a sale. On the other hand, there are certain tones of voice that are negative for people, or they look at a particular image and it's negative and that sort of thing. And that's what you want to avoid in terms of conflict. I always want to kind of feel out and listen very carefully and watch what people respond to in terms of negative or positive. And then I try to avoid those negative things, words, phrases, pictures, colors, whatever it is, and accentuate the positive. So again, it's common sense, but this gives you a structure and a pattern to make a conscious confidence. So if you go into the next slide here, I just want to kind of ask yourself before we wrap up here, is just think to yourself, what are some of your positive anchors and what are some of your negative anchors? You know, gee, positive anchors, I mean, I'm a coffee drinker, so obviously first thing this morning, the smell of good coffee is it's great. It's a really positive anchor. There's just those simple things. You know, negative anchors can be all kinds of things, a tone of voice. You know, we all have our own, you know, positive and negative anchors at work. So it's very important to understand not only what yours are, but what other people's as well when you interact with them, because it will either help facilitate rapport or it'll nix it. Okay, let's go to the last piece here in application. Is on the phone. Now, when you're on the phone with somebody, and this is for those of you that are auditory, this is going to be like second nature. For those of you that are more kinesthetic, particularly visuals, it might be like, huh? So again, your comfort zone is around your style here. So when I talk to people, I always want to talk about how things look, how things sound, and how things feel. And, you know, some people say, oh, you know, if they're uncomfortable with feelings, I don't want to talk to somebody. Let's say I've got a client on the phone and I know the kinesthetic. I'll talk about a approach to solving a problem. I'll say, well, how's that feeling? Does that feel okay? Does that feel right? And they go, yeah, that feels great, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, it's the thing of how does it sound? Or if you want to be neutral, if this is sort of an expanded NLP training turn of things, but it would be like use words that are neutral, like, you know, does that make sense? And then whatever sense they make sense in, they just kind of put it in there. So that's a little bit on that you can use stuff on the phone. So let's take a couple minutes and wrap up here. And what we have is, this is the process that you go through, process flow, kind of visual and serial, not too deep, kind of high level, big picture. So what you've got here is that you diagnose the style, as I said, recognize the style, develop style fit. Very important to identify the needs, outcomes, the business objectives, the deliverables, whatever it is that defines success for the individual that you're working for or yourself, and then to develop flexible responses, which hopefully you're even able to do now after understanding at a conscious level the differences in style. So let's wrap up with the key learning points. Okay, so rapport over time equals trust. So, you know, instant rapport or getting rapport with somebody is good, but it's just the first step. But if you kind of deconstruct here, people that you trust are people that you've had rapport with over a long period of time and in a lot of probably conflict situations that you work through. And that is kind of the context that defines trust and rapport over time. So, you know, hopefully listening to this, for some of the benefits that, you understand yourself, your clients, and all stakeholders want, and you will at times understand it better than they do. In other words, a lot of people don't know that they're primarily, let's say, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, but you have enough cues now where you can recognize that pretty quickly, and you can facilitate their learning by understanding that. The second thing is that practice related to that is practice conscious competence. Now that you understand what these patterns are in terms of communication style, develop rapport and some of the tools around chunking and formatting and language and metaphor that you have. And the more that you do this, the easier it will be and the more flexible that you will come. It might be, you know, particularly if you're way out of your own style comfort zone, it'll be a little bit challenging, but, you know, my approach to this is it's remedial. The more that you practice it, the more that you're aware of it, the easier it gets, and it does become second nature after a while, and then it kind of slips back into the unconscious because you're just doing it all the time. So with that, Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And we do have about 5 minutes for a live Q&A. So attendees, why don't you go ahead, if you have any questions, go ahead and submit those now into the chat box. And while we wait for those questions to come in, let me share a little bit about the program that is the foundation of today's session. And that is the Neurolinguistic Communication Profile, you can review this set for 30 days risk-free. And we are also offering a 30% discount, and you will receive a coupon code in your email after this session. And if you would like to purchase this set or review it, please visit HRDQstore.com. All right, great. And we do have a number of questions coming in, and it looks like our first one is coming from Adam. When presenting, should you try to incorporate all 3 styles to accommodate your audience?
A great question, and the ideal situation, and when you're doing any kind of training or presentation, is yes. So you always can't do that, but yeah, you should have it visual, and I like to have my material visually formatted in a couple of ways. Like usually, I'll start with kind of go to the normal business. I'll usually start with some PowerPoint, but I like to have some Excel or some charts and stuff as a backup. You have to have good conversation and work that in there as well. Have a period for Q&A. This is all kind of straightforward stuff, but if you miss one of it, now the other thing too is, what about the tactile part? As visual as we've gotten and as application electronic oriented has gotten, people like to touch stuff. So maybe now they've got their smartphone or their iPad or something, but that's why you push stuff out in quote unquote soft copy, so that they can hold their iPad or something and look at it. I also make handouts as well. So a lot of times you can't do all of this, but if you ideal world you can do this, and the technology is getting better. For example, if any of you have had an experience with telepresence or some version of telepresence, that's really answered the question of how do I get that visual component and tactile, actually, because I can watch people move, I can see their facial expressions, I know their emotions. But you can have 100 people in Singapore, another 100 people in New York, and do that. So yes, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying go for that. That's important.
All right, great, thanks. And our next question is coming from Jeff. Recognizing that this takes practice, what would be the average time for the normal person to achieve rapport?
Well, I'm assuming you're talking about it not as an unconscious competence, because that could be instantaneous depending on who you're meeting, but at a conscious competence level. And if you know this stuff, it takes a couple of minutes, and that's primarily. This is real quicker. So what I do is, if I don't know somebody and I can't see something or hear something right away, I kind of try to cycle through a few things. Like I throw some bait out there, some visual bait, some auditory bait, some tactile bait, and see which one they respond to. So sometimes that can take half a minute or a minute before I get a response, and then I say, oh, okay, well, they've responded to the slide that I showed them. Now I'm going to go down this visual path, or hey, they just want to sit down and talk about this, and I'll go that way. It just takes a minute or two when you're deliberate and conscious about it.
All right, great, thanks. And I think we probably have time for just one more. This one is coming from Diana. Will my style change at work versus at home?
Great question. Okay, yes, and generally speaking, your style at home and at work are different. They don't be radically different, and that's because the context that you're in at home or at work is different. There are some basic patterns. I can't don't have time to go into all of it, but generally most of us are more emotional at home, particularly if we have kids or pets or that sort of thing, and more tactile and that sort of stuff. And you relax, you let down, and that kind of thing kind of fall out of the style that work's demanded of you during the day. So that's kind of the shift that you'll see here. A lot of times at work it's a learned style, sometimes it's a natural style, and at home it tends to be a little bit more what your natural predisposition is.
All right, great, thanks. So Jim, I think that's all the time we have. Would you just like to add any final thoughts before I go ahead and wrap up this session?
I just want to thank everybody again for their time and for hanging in there. till the end. Really appreciate it. I hope this has been useful, and feel free to contact HRDQ if you have any other questions, and see about answering those and helping you out any way I can. So again, thanks very much for your time. Take care, and enjoy the new learnings.
All right, great. Thanks again. And if we didn't get time to answer your questions, you are going to receive an emailed response to those answered questions from Jim probably about midweek of next week. So we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative.